What I'm about to share in this video, you must promise not to use for evil, because I'm going to give you an alternative way of doing life that, if fallen into the wrong hands, could be used maliciously. But that is not my intention. Rather, I want you to consider how you can leverage this approach to improve your life and to inspire others to do the same. So make sure that you promise to use this information for constructive and well-intentioned purposes only. Now, with that disclaimer out of the way, I'll start off by saying that from the moment you were born, you were probably told to follow the rules, to stay in line, to never cause disruption. And in many respects, that subconscious programming has stuck with you well into adulthood. Even as a seemingly independent, free-thinking adult, much of what you do and how you conduct yourself is dictated by the tenets of conformity that have been instilled in you since a young age. And this is for good reason, because humans are hardwired to cooperate. We have an instinct to try to fit in and not be too disruptive, because in the distant past, 10,000 plus years ago, conforming to your group was a matter of survival. But society has evolved since then. With the advent of agriculture, modern civilization has come into prominence, and the social dynamics among humans has shifted as a result. So individualism is now a modern luxury that we couldn't afford in the past. So today we are far removed from the times where conformity was essential for survival. And in fact, I would argue that society has collectively moved in the direction of selective nonconformity as the best survival strategy. Now, why do I say this? Well, let's just look at the facts. 2 out of every 3 adults in the US say that work is a major source of stress in their lives. The obesity rate among Americans has tripled over the past 50 years or so, and more than half of all couples in the US say that financial uncertainty has negatively affected their relationships. So this is indicative of systemic failures in modern society. So it stands to reason that fully conforming to this modern lifestyle that's causing the population to be sicker, to be more stressed out, well, it's ill-advised. So if you want to avoid these things and to live a healthier, a more purposeful, and a more grounded life, then you must break some of the unwritten rules that society holds sacred. Or in other words, you must now assume the role of the villain. Now, the villain is not necessarily bad, but rather it is the person who challenges the current system of order. I tapped into Cerebrix to provide us with a bit more detail on the role of the villain. And it says that the villain is essentially a person who places their own self-interest over conforming to society. So if the current way of doing things in some domain of your life isn't working, then you must become the villain by selectively breaking the cultural norms that are no longer serving your purpose. So how does one even assume the role of the villain? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do just that. But before I continue, you should also know that I created a free workflow that you can use to help you do this process using either ChatGPT or Cerebrix. Now, I'll say that you will get much better and more pointed responses with Cerebrix, since I created it specifically for using it in this way, but you can use either. And if you're interested, the workflow is available for free in the links below. Now, on to the process. It all starts with creating your origin story and knowing your why. So your pain point, which is the most prominent source of negativity in your life, is the foundation of your origin story. So there's something in your life currently that's lowering your frequency. It could be something with your career, your relationship, a financial situation, but we all have some sort of problem or disturbance in our lives. Now, in some cases, you can be at a point where your biggest problem is relatively minor. And in other cases, you could be experiencing an existential crisis, but there is always one problem in your life that reigns supreme above all others. Now, I asked Cerebrix to give me the top 5 problems faced by the average American, and it says that poor health, financial stress, digital distractions, social isolation, and having no purpose in life are the most common. So your pain point is likely rooted in one of these problems, but of course it could be completely different depending on your own personal situation. So to get super clear about your specific pain point, you can walk yourself through your own journey that eventually led you to believing that the current way of doing things is not working for you and that you need to make a change. So what specific experiences did you have which created a sense of despair for you? Now, for me, I remember at the beginning of COVID, I was laid off from my job, and I spent the next 10 months applying to hundreds of jobs and doing countless interviews only for people who barely knew me to tell me that I didn't have the skills that they were looking for. And that's based on a 15-minute conversation or a 30-minute conversation. Now, I found that to be an extremely dehumanizing experience in so many ways. And so that marked the beginning of my villain origin story when it comes to prioritizing personal sovereignty over climbing the corporate ladder. And ever since then, my life has been committed to this cause. And that's just one of many revelations that I've had over the years that have led me to obsessively pursue this current lifestyle that I'm enjoying. Your origin story is important because it is the foundation for your vision moving forward. It's what gives you motivation and a sense of purpose. And most importantly, it's the reason why you're now challenging the societal norms that are holding you back from living your best possible life. And from your origin story, you'll define your purpose in life, your principles, your values that you stand on, as well as your vision. Now, if you'd like a bit of help in crafting your own origin story, then you can use the free workflow that I provided to help you to do this through a series of journal entries before presenting you with 3 suggested villain origin stories that you can select from. Now, for this example, I used a scenario of someone who realized that they've let themselves get a bit too out of shape because they followed the narrative that career is more important than health. Now, whether you use AI or you do it manually, you do it yourself, once you've nailed down your origin story, next you'll need to assume a new identity by creating an alter ego. So shifting into a new identity is challenging to say the least. So creating an alter ego gives you a concrete image of the person that you need to become. It gives you a sort of blueprint for unleashing the suppressed characteristics within you that should be emphasized to assume a different identity. And this is important because if these qualities don't naturally present themselves, then you may suffer from imposter syndrome. And so the alter ego gives you permission to assume a different identity without feeling like an imposter. A lot of people use alter egos to awaken the element within them when they are called to rise to the situation. On the court, Kobe Bryant was the Black Mamba. During grueling physical challenges, David Goggins talks about how he becomes Goggins. And so you'll need to do the same for yourself by creating an alter ego that embodies the type of person who challenges society in the way that you've deemed important for you. So come up with a name for this person, create an identity profile, define this person's values and principles, and then most importantly, identify their superpower. And this will be the basis of the villain role that you will step into as a force for positive change in your life and for society. And using the free workflow that I provided, you can do this with ChatGPT or with Cerebrix to output 3 different suggested alter egos along with their respective identity profiles. And then you can choose the one that best fits. With your alter ego established, next you need to choose your adversary, decide which societal rules you will reject, and then replace them with your own rules. When you think back to your origin story, the reason why you are now in a place where you feel that drastic change is necessary is because whatever system you've once followed, well, it's not working anymore. And there were certain rules or expectations that you abided by only for them to lead you to experiencing the pain point that you now want to overcome. For example, eating a standard American diet is a cultural norm that has caused many people to struggle with their health and with their fitness. Scrolling on social media is a cultural norm that causes many people to spend their time in a state of passive consumption rather than in active creation, which can lead to a sense of unfulfillment and dopamine overload, among many other things. So basically, there are certain unwritten societal rules and norms that serve as the underpinnings of your origin story, and you need to figure out what they are. These are your adversaries. They are the rules that you need to break. You need to replace them with your own rules based on your own values. One of my biggest adversaries at this moment is the idea that getting promoted or job hopping my way up to higher positions is the hallmark of success. And subscribing to this type of thinking in the past is what put me in the position of being dehumanized by corporate culture. So instead, I replaced it with my own rules that value health, exploration, self-mastery over climbing the corporate ladder. So my origin story has pointed me towards the cause that I need to fight for and the status quo that I need to fight against. This is what you also need to do. So think about the unwritten rules you followed that have led you to the big problem that you're currently experiencing in life, and then decide how you will flip the script. How will you push back against those rules moving forward? And what new rules will you create for yourself to challenge the status quo? Now, I realize that this is a bit of a nebulous process. So the free AI workflow that I created will do this for you by taking your responses to a few questions and then outputting a list of unwritten rules that you may want to consider dropping. And then it'll suggest some new rules to begin following. With that said, the final step for stepping into the villain role is to exploit inconsistencies to your favor. Observe the gaps in logic and leverage those insights to gain a strategic advantage. Society is full of logical inconsistencies, and as the villain who challenges the status quo, you will use these inconsistencies to inform your own countercultural lifestyle. Now that you're paying attention, you'll begin to see how many cultural norms or unwritten rules are actually quite destructive to most people's grander life vision. For example, the normalization of a hyper-consumerist society to the detriment of many people's own aspirations for financial freedom is one of those societal inconsistencies. Despite people having a perfectly functional home, the societal narrative says that upgrading into bigger homes with more closet space and nicer yards is the expected path. But this means spending more money, which also means more time working in a high stress job, which also means suboptimal health and higher medical bills. And then the list goes on. And this represents a logical gap in the unwritten rules of society because it leads so many people farther and farther away from their aspirations to have a more free and a more autonomous life. When you make this observation, you're now positioned to exploit this inconsistency to your advantage. And this is exactly what I did. I adopted a lifestyle that, in my view at least, closed the gap and ensured that my daily actions were consistent with my desire to never be dehumanized by corporate culture again and to have freedom to do what I want with my time. And I did this by selling almost everything that I own, including my home, and reducing my material possessions down to basically whatever I can fit into a single moving box. And this reduced my financial burden, thus reducing my need to be plugged into a system that was a major source of discontentment in my life. Since your origin story, your alter ego, your adversaries, and the rules that you no longer conform to are likely different than mine, the way that you exploit the logical gaps will also be different, but they will always entail observing how people follow social norms that you disagree with and then doing the opposite of what everyone else is doing. So that can mean being that person who chooses not to drink alcohol, or it can mean permanently deleting your social media, or it can possibly mean leaving the big city and moving to a quiet town somewhere and living a slow paced life that doesn't require working a high stress job or being in the rat race. And so the possibilities are endless, but when you go against the status quo like this, you will, in a sense, be the villain because you cast a light on the absurdities of society. And while most may perceive you as a threat, you will be doing yourself a massive favor by curating a much more connected and an intentional lifestyle for yourself. And what's more is that you will also inspire a few others in the process. So here you can see how I used artificial intelligence to help me to identify logical gaps and ultimately develop a strategy that gives me more concrete and actionable steps that I can take to stop doing what everyone else is doing and to start playing by my own rules that I created for myself. And then this is finished off with a quick overview that concisely summarizes everything that I just talked about in this video. So you can use this process that I just went over if you wish, or you can come up with your own method for shifting into the identity of a villain as a force for positive change. But if you do follow these 4 steps, you will have successfully entered into the role of the villain. And this is the identity shift that I had for myself. I started to look at myself as a sort of villain who was created by a broken system. And now my purpose is to fight back against the elements of that system, which are misaligned with my values, with my goals, and with my overall vision for a well-lived life. And I think that you should do the same for yourself. Before I end, you should also know that if you would like to use artificial intelligence to help you do all of this that I talked about in the video, plus many more things, then I've created a full database of workflows and prompts that you can use to navigate some of your most challenging problems in life. And the database comes complimentary with Cerebrix, which is the tool that I created for people like yourself who want to get focused and start living much more intentionally. And lastly, if you're ready to start taking action towards a newer and towards a better version of yourself, then you can pick up a copy of the Self-Reinvention Cheat Code, which is a field manual designed to help you get locked in and reboot your life in just 60 days. You can find everything in the links below. And that's everything for today, guys. I hope that you enjoyed the message. And until next time, always remember to get up, get out, and get after it. Peace.